A Florida hospital was ordered to pay $261 million last month over claims of medically kidnapping a 10-year-old girl. The high-profile case was the subject of the Netflix documentary Take Care of Maya. It centers on what happened after the controversial methods used to treat a child's rare pain disorder were perceived as child abuse perpetrated by her parents. We're joined now by Maya Kowalski. She's the girl at the center of that case who is now 17. She joins us via video chat. Welcome, Maya, and our condolences for all you've been through, including the loss of your mother.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning. We're also joined in studio by Ponte Vedra attorney Greg Anderson, who led Maya's legal team in the landmark case. Thanks for being here, Greg.
Hi, Ann. Welcome.
Maya, we'll get to the criminal case and the jury verdict in just a moment, but for people who have not followed your case closely, you were brought to Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital in St. Petersburg in early October 2016 for an emergency flare-up of your chronic pain disorder. You were 10 at the time. You were in a wheelchair and receiving treatment that included very large doses of the drug ketamine. Explain what happened over the next 3 months.
Over the next 3 months, there was an order issued where my parents were forbidden to see me. At a certain point, I was permitted contact with my dad and my brother, but only under heavily supervised circumstances. As for my mom, I was allowed to call her at certain points, but again, somebody had to be in the room monitoring the calls, but I never got to physically see her over the next 3 months. And as well, during that time, I was not allowed to get any of my infusions for my CRPS.
And you were basically in the custody of the state as determined by the courts. Is that right?
Correct.
So the hospital suspected abuse in this case, and they believed, Maya, that it was something akin to what's known as Munchausen syndrome by proxy, in which parents or caregivers sort of fake an illness for a child and treat them for it. You were only allowed to leave the hospital after a court ordered your release, and that didn't happen until after your mother's suicide. And again, so sorry to talk about that and to bring it up, but obviously that's a very central part of this case. She left a note that basically blamed the court system for the damage it did to your family.
Yeah, she did leave a note, and I definitely believe that the way that the court tormented her, as well as John Hopkins All Children's Hospital, that's what caused her death.
Greg, Maya was evaluated by a child welfare agency doctor who specialized in detecting child abuse. And obviously, you disagree with her determination. But how should people in that position balance their desire to protect children with the rights of families and the interests of the children themselves?
Well, are we talking about the perspective of the doctors and the state, or are we talking about the parents themselves?
Well, initially, the perception that the child abuse was being perpetrated was a decision made by a child abuse evaluator.
Sally Smith, yes. Sally Smith had an infamous record down there. In fact, there was a Second District Court of Appeals opinion that questioned whether she could even be trusted to make these diagnoses. And the essential problem in the case is that Sally Smith, who was board certified in pediatric child abuse, which is a relatively new board certification, she felt that because of that, if she could classify whatever was happening as child abuse, that she needed no more expertise in it. Now, complex regional pain syndrome is a complex disease. It's one of the most painful diseases known to medicine. And you have to do a significant amount of clinical work to reach the diagnosis. And Johns Hopkins had already agreed with that diagnosis, but Sally Smith went in and told them, no, I think this is Munchausen by proxy. Sally Smith was not a pediatric psychiatrist or psychologist. She's not a neurologist. She was not a neurosurgeon, nor was she a pain management specialist. So she had none of the specialties that you would need to truly evaluate Maya. And yet she went forward and, you know, if you're a pediatric child abuse expert, that you're a hammer and everything looks like a tack. And so that's how this whole thing got started. But really, It was Johns Hopkins that maintained this and kept Maya in there for so long. And in fact, tried to develop a case against her while she was in there, unbelievably.
You and I spoke last summer, Greg, before the trial got underway, and you used a term I'd never heard before: medical kidnapping.
Yeah, I don't know if I coined it, but pretty close to it. And medical kidnapping is when a hospital decides that for whatever reason, they're going to drop a dime, as we say, on you. They're going to report you, which they can do and should do when there are instances of child abuse. But in many instances, particularly in the past, I would say 10 years, this has really started up, they are making allegations where there are very loose standards, very loose definitions. One of them is medical negligence. Another one is medical child abuse. And these have definitions that are so broad that you can literally throw anything into it. And what has happened is certain hospitals, and perhaps not even the entire hospital, maybe just groups of doctors there, and I think more prevalently risk management services within the hospitals. If you're a troubling parent, if they think that for whatever reason you could be a problem down the road, well, making that call to DCF relieves a lot of problems because the parents shift from looking at what the hospital's doing over to just keeping their child. And so if you've got a parent who's saying, hey, you forgot to do this here, or why is my child getting worse when you told me this would make him better, one phone call can relieve all your problems. And so medical kidnapping is where these, particularly these terms of medical child abuse and medical negligence are used so that a hospital can take a child away by creating a case against the parents. And the next thing you know, the parents have a very long battle, legal battle, and very expensive legal battle to get their child back.
We're talking to Maya Kowalski and her attorney, Greg Anderson. Did you follow the trial of Maya Kowalski, or have you watched the documentary? Do you have questions? We invite you to join our conversation at 549-2937. Email us at firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. You can also message us on the First Coast Connect Facebook and Instagram pages, or tag us on X at FCC On Air. Maya, the documentary that came out this summer obviously put a lot of attention on this case and on you personally. I wonder if it in any way prepared you for the even more intense spotlight that this trial brought. And I'm curious how you managed that. Obviously, just still very young at age 17.
Yeah, after the Netflix documentary aired, weirdly enough, I never got recognized. I felt like pretty safe going outside without, somebody stopping me. But after the trial, it's a completely different interaction with the public. I mean, I get recognized almost every single time I go out. I feel like I have to get all dressed up before I go outside just in case somebody wants to take a picture. It's happened before. It's very interesting. I'm glad that it does have a lot of attention, the story, because I think the message is really powerful. But it is a little awkward as, just a 17-year-old, being out with friends and somebody coming up to you and asking if you're from the documentary or if you're the person from the court case.
And talk about the message, because obviously the circumstances of your diagnosed pain disorder, what happened to you in the hospital, are pretty unusual. So, how does the case carry a larger message given the specificity of your circumstance?
Well, firstly, I think it's really important to bring more awareness and attention to rare diseases. I think it's especially important in medical centers like hospitals or just facilities, just to prevent, just some sort of like misunderstanding from even beginning. The other message would be to probably, like, I would say there needs to be a lot of reform in the Child Protective Services team, just so kids aren't stripped from their families off of a single opinion from some random doctor.
And the case um, required you to take the stand, not once but twice, I believe. And I'm wondering how your team helped prepare you, how your family helped prepare you, and how you dealt with that kind of pressure.
Well, I would say I didn't really get a lot of prep. I was shown pictures and we did go through a series of just like family photos and we talked about that. But I think just simple conversations were really helpful. I don't really like planning for talking because it just doesn't work for me. So I think just preparing in like that very simple way of just, reminiscing of family memories or talking about timelines, that was important for me to take the stand and just seem prepared.
And were you personally surprised by the jury verdict? Did you have a sense, being in that courtroom every day for, I believe it was 8 weeks, um, where the jury's head was at, kind of what they were thinking about you and about the case?
To be honest, I just prayed. I put it in God's hands. I didn't really want to focus too much on like where the jury's head was at because at the end of the day, I can't control that. That's completely up to them. They're their own person. So instead of wasting my time worrying about, oh, what's going to happen, I really, really tried to just give it to God.
Greg, I want to ask you the same question. This was a long trial. This was a really unusually intense trial. It was a very, um, I would say, heated trial.
Yeah.
So describe what it was like and what your expectations were as the jury verdict drew close.
Well, first, let me talk for a second about Maya's prep. You got to remember that Maya was deposed 5 times. 5 times, and this litigation went on for 5 years. So Maya had lived with this. I mean, well, when she first came down with CRPS, she was 9, and she was 10 when she went into Johns Hopkins on that fateful October. Um, so she'd lived with this thing for a very long time, but in the litigation itself, she got quite the training on the process, and the depositions were absolutely brutal, asking her what we felt, and I think ultimately the judge felt, were completely inappropriate questions, and certainly things that you do not say to somebody her age, which at various times was, I think, 14, 15, 16. It might have been earlier when the first one went down. But in any event, by the time she got to the trial, she was pretty experienced about the ways of cross-examination and what they were after. The trial itself, from my perspective, was kind of a nightmare, but also a dream. If that makes absolutely no sense. Getting the case to trial had become a quest because they had been able to play keep away with this for 3.5 years since the first time we tried to set it or did have it set for trial. In the trial itself, we were very fortunate, I think, with the jury we got. They were very expressive. They asked probing, inquisitive questions that showed that they were following the evidence. They knew what the point was. And I got to say, in some cases, in Florida, jurors are allowed to ask questions. And so, particularly towards the middle end of the trial, when I was, this thing went on for a long time, 9 weeks, and I was getting a little tired there. Sometimes I just ask a couple cross-examination questions and turn it over to the jury because they were so invested in the facts here that their cross-examination was, I think, a little bit better than mine sometimes. And then I'd come back afterwards, and fill in anything I wanted. But it was, I don't know, words. It's very hard to describe the amount of emotion that goes into one of these things. And did we know that we were going to prevail on this? I always felt in my heart that we were going to prevail. The big question was what the jury was going to do with damages, and were they going to agree with everything that we were alleging?
We've got a call. Peter on the South Side has a comment about medical care. Good morning, Peter. Welcome to First Coast Connect.
Yes, good morning. I am not an expert, and it is not about medical care. I do have some familiarity with risk management, and my comment is that we live in a litigious society, so people are always looking over their shoulder, as perhaps they should, to be second guessed. We're also in an environment now where people are very aware of child abuse, and you see cases in the papers, in the news quite often where the comment is, well, where was Child Protective Services? These are obvious signs, etc. So I guess there's a broader issue here, and that is what kind of care and what kind of standards should be when you're concerned about child safety and risk management, because after all, if you mess up, there's a bunch of lawyers waiting to take you to court.
Thanks, Peter. Appreciate it. Maya, I have a question for you about that, just given all of the questions that were raised about the diagnosis you received. Did you ever have any questions or any doubt about the accuracy of that diagnosis?
Of CRPS?
Yeah.
No, I was very confident with my doctors. I mean, here's somebody who's dealt with it for years on end and literally has like a research center for the disease. I believed him wholeheartedly. And then for multiple other doctors, like CRPS specialists, to confirm the diagnosis, I mean, I feel like at that point there's no disputing it.
We did reach out to the hospital and their attorneys to see if they had any comment or if they wanted to, provide any information for this discussion. They didn't. They didn't want to join the conversation, but we do have some sound here from Ethan Shapiro. He was the attorney for Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital in St. Petersburg. Let's hear what he had to say.
I think it's important for the jury to understand that what All Children's did was brave. They were encountered with a situation where their sense that something was amiss was up. Again, you have to remember that by the time Maya had come to us, she had been in a wheelchair for 15 months and had been subjected to what was unfortunately a massive amount of unnecessary drugs given at dangerous levels. So that's something that we would have reinforced with the jury. But I think they heard that not just through my closing argument, but from the dozens of witnesses who came to testify from not just All Children's, but Tampa General, Lurie Children's, and all of the world-class institutions that were involved in Maya's care.
So attorney Ethan Shapiro speaking there. Obviously, that was before the jury verdict, Greg.
Yes.
And evidently they didn't agree. But there were a lot of questions raised about the nature of the medical treatment that she received prior to the hospitalization.
There were. But there was a long history with not only expert physicians who knew far more than Sally Smith and frankly far more than any of the physicians at Johns Hopkins, but a long history with Johns Hopkins itself. Johns Hopkins put the port in Maya's side so she could get the infusions. They later came back and complained were excessive and shouldn't be done. Johns Hopkins had been treating Maya for, I think it was 14 months before this, before she went in October of 2016. And they had a history that would definitively show, and did definitively show to anybody who truly was an expert in CRPS, that she had it. As to the treatment, CRPS, the defense tried to paint as a party drug, and it's something that immediately should put up red flags, was their favorite term.
The ketamine.
The ketamine, I'm sorry. And that the ketamine has been under study for 50 years. It was certified in the 1970s, and it has been used as an anesthetic since that time. The dosages that Maya received were larger than normal, but Maya had tried all of the other methods to treat CRPS. So you don't up the levels of CRPS. I can't keep saying CRPS. I mean ketamine, until you have tried all the other methods: physical therapy, psychological therapy, occupational therapy, opioids. She had been through rounds of opioids. And the only thing that worked for her were higher dosage than usual of ketamine. But the people who were administering it had been administering it for a long time, using this drug as a method to combat CRPS. Like I said, it's the most painful disease known to medicine. And so there's never been a death from it. It has a very high percentage of success rate. And most importantly, it worked for Maya. It put her in remission when nothing else had. And so had the hospital done its research, and I think they probably did do their research, they realized fairly quickly through the process they made a mistake. And I think from there, it was a narrative that they wanted to start and successfully carry through to the jury. Unfortunately for them, the jury rejected that.
We've got a call. Sabrina from Gainesville is on the line. Good morning, Sabrina. Welcome to First Coast Connect.
Hey, good morning. I appreciate you guys taking my call. I just wanted to call in and express what an inspiration Maya and her entire story has been for me personally. I've been following the story. I live in Florida here. I lost my father to medical malpractice, and I am unable to pursue because my dad was single, and I am over the age of 25. And I actually was at an event last month with a ton of people at a car show. It was my dad's passion. I had some of his parts there. I was trying to find homes for them because I am my dad's only child, and what am I going to do with all these Mopar parts? And I ran into a man named Scott, and he was so kind, and he listened to everything I had to say. And at the end of our conversation, he was like, Sabrina, I know your dad. He used to come up here on his red pickup truck and be at this same car show. And I just broke down crying because I'm like, you're right. That was my dad. And he had such amazing things to say. And he reminded me that, it's so important not to give up, and it's so important to keep fighting. And I think Maya is truly a classic example of that strength and that bravery, because it's not an easy fight, and I'm on it now. And I just wanted to thank her for that.
Thank you, Sabrina. Maya, what kind of feedback have you gotten generally about what you've gone through? I would imagine you hear some of both sides.
I do hear some of both sides, that's right, but I would say the majority has been positive. I don't really go on my social media and scroll through comments and read them. So if I'm on my phone and I get a comment and it's negative, that's the only way I'm going to see it. And most of them I just dismiss because it's very evident that they haven't watched the trial or they haven't even watched the documentary. It doesn't really get to me, the negative, and I'm glad that it doesn't because it just gives more room for the positive to fuel me.
And when someone like Sabrina has a message for you that she finds the story inspirational, how does that affect you?
It makes me so emotional. I was actually tearing up as that was playing, and it's hard. It breaks my heart that other people have similar stories. But again, it just makes me want to move forward with everything.
So there's some legal battles that lie ahead. Um, there is a hearing, I believe, a week from Friday that is going to discuss a number of things, but the defense in this case is raising questions about the integrity of the jury. Can you talk a little bit about that, Greg?
It's unusual, but they have gone after one juror in particular. We called juror number one because that was the selection process. He was assigned number one.
And the foreperson, is that right?
And ended up being the foreperson. And he asked probably the most probative questions throughout the case. But he asked them of both sides. And at the start, I thought that he was very pro-defense because of the questions. Really getting into, now, how can you prove this? How can you say that? And then when they had to prove their case, he was equally as inquisitive, let's say, of their case. There's nothing to these allegations. I think that they made up their mind that because his questions were so intelligent, knowledgeable, and were probing the negative aspects of their case, that they just decided he must have taken over the jury, and then there was some flaw there. And
They're
the,
also, though, saying that his wife attended the
well, it's
trial and was
ridiculous.
posting on social media about the case in a detail that perhaps a spouse ought not know.
Yeah, except that we proved every single one of those that the phrases had come up in the trial previously. And so the whole idea was that the juror knew about a particular phrase that could only be found on one of the doctor's websites. Well, then we proved that one of the physical therapists had used this term, creature comforts, in her testimony. And creature comforts is not that unusual of a term. And so a big part of their theory was, well, since he used the term creature comfort in one of his questions, that must mean he's talking to his wife. And that absolutely positively wasn't true. Judge Carroll asked the jurors every single time they came back, even for a 5-minute break. Now, have you spoken with anyone? Have you read any media? Have you learned anything about the case? Have you talked among yourselves? And no, 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 and no throughout the whole thing. The defense has really been chasing their tail on this one, and I'm very confident that the judge is going to deny that motion.
Maya, there's also a new recently filed lawsuit against the hospital. If you're comfortable talking about it, Maya, what is that about?
It's about another incident that happened while I was staying at Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital. As Greg has stated previously, we have tried bringing it up in court. As a matter of fact, I did a proffer on it without the jury present. The judge didn't really want it to come in since the jury wasn't questioned pre-trial about that specific topic. It's just a very emotional thing for me. It's hard for me to get into, but yeah.
That's all right, Greg. What can you tell us about that Maya's comfortable talking about?
Well, there was an incident involving a doctor that came in without an escort, and uh, let us say disrobed Maya under some extremely suspicious circumstances, and other things went on. And we did not know about it. Maya, I believe, firmly had suppressed it, but we were able to confirm in some of the psychological records that she had tried to tell the pediatric psychologist there at the hospital about it and was shut down in that. And it wasn't until, I think, 2 weeks in that I had a conversation with Maya, and I said, now, Maya, you got to tell me every single thing, every single time anybody at that hospital touched you, no matter how slight or what the circumstances were. And finally, Maya explained what had happened, and I was horrified, absolutely horrified. But as an attorney and officer of the court, you don't just come in. I believed Maya. Maya has never misrepresented a thing to me, was never caught in impeachment at trial. I knew that this had happened, but I still went out and found corroborating evidence in medical records where she had tried to say something about it and people had not followed up, and also found independent witness. And then I asked the court, can we bring this in? Because I had already raised, obviously, abuse as one of the issues and a battery count. And the court listened, and I think part of him wanted to bring it in. It definitely was part of this story, this circumstance, and what happened to Maya. But he felt as though the jury had not been questioned specifically about sexual assault and battery. And he did not believe that that was fair. And so, and we made clear at the trial we were going to bring a separate suit, and we have.
Maya, just kind of final thoughts here. This is a big settlement. What is your plan? What intention do you have to do with the money? What is your plan for your own future at this point?
Well, I think that I would personally really enjoy to use it for some family time, like vacations, and eventually moving out of this house. But we do have bigger plans with the funds. I think it'd be really neat to make a foundation in honor of my mom, and it would be directed towards CRPS and possibly victims of wrongful kidnapping from hospitals.
Mark called. He said he wanted to thank Maya for making her story public. And we certainly thank both of you for being here today. Maya Kowalski, thank you for joining us via video. Greg Anderson, thanks so much for coming in studio. We appreciate both of you being here.
Very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.